Hello everybody! With this video you can test and practice your pronunciation skills for German words based upon the rules that you learned in my other videos. So here's how it works. I show you a German word. You pause the video and guess how that word is pronounced. You can do that by asking yourself which letters in this word are pronounced differently than in English. And then I show you the solution. So let's start with the first word. How would you pronounce it? Which letters do you think are pronounced differently than in English? Here's the solution. This letter is pronounced differently. You guys pronounce it like a V, but do you remember how we pronounce it? As I showed you in my other video, we Germans pronounce the V almost always like an F, and in this case too. Then the next letter here is an S. I guess that in this case you would pronounce it the same way that we guys do. You would pronounce it like an S, like a double S, not like in zoo. But why did I color this green? Because normally we don't pronounce it like you guys. Normally we pronounce it differently. So why did we pronounce it here the same way like you guys do? Do you remember the rule? Here is the rule. This is how we normally pronounce the S, like in zoo. But in the special case, down here, when the S is at the ending of a syllable, which is why I wrote E and S, means ending of a syllable, in this case, the S is pronounced like in kiss. Then there's this letter here. You guys call this letter W, but do you know how we pronounce this letter? Do you remember? We pronounce this letter like in vessel, like you guys pronounce the V. Then these two letters, I assume that in this case you pronounce this letter different than we guys do, because you sometimes pronounce this letter like an A and sometimes like an R. And we Germans only pronounce it in one way, namely like an R, like an up, the short version, or in far, the long version. And also the letter G, we pronounce the letter G like G, like in go, and in this case we also pronounce it like G. And then there's the letter E and the letter N. I didn't color this letter red because I assume that in this case you would pronounce this letter the same way like we guys would pronounce it, like an E, or like in 10, like E-N. But if you would pronounce it differently, then of course I had to color it as well. So let's put this all together. Volkswagen. I say it again. Volkswagen. Volkswagen. So here is the next word. Try to imagine how it's pronounced. The first word, which is a German article, and the next word, which is the noun and stands for sun. Here is the solution. The letter R is always pronounced different than in German. So the question is not if it's pronounced different, but in which way. So what do you think? Do you remember the rules? Here you can see if the R is at the end of a word, then it's pronounced like a reduced R sound. The E, in this case, I didn't put in red because I thought that in this case you pronounce it also like we guys do the E. But if you would pronounce it like E, then I would put it in red too, because we always pronounce it like an E. But anyway, the S is another letter which I assume that you guys would pronounce differently. Do you know how we Germans pronounce that sound? If you can remember, I showed you in my video that the S is pronounced like in zoo. Same is true for here. Then we have this letter. We pronounce it in a certain way, because here is the letter H, and for this letter there are some special rules concerning this vowel. Do you remember the rules? The rules are that vowels and umlaute are always pronounced in a long way if they happen before an H, an H. And in this case, that is the case. And for this reason, the O is not pronounced like O, but like O. So the rest of the letters, I guess, are pronounced in the same way like in English. So let's put this all together. Der Sohn. I repeat, der Sohn. So here is the next word. Try to think which letter is pronounced differently than in English. Here is the solution. The letter scharfes S, also called SZ. Do you remember the rules for how this is pronounced? Here it is. As you can see, the scharfes S, aka the SZ, is pronounced like in kiss. Then the letter L is pronounced like in English, but this letter is pronounced differently in German. Do you know the rule? This letter is always pronounced like E in German, not like I, sometimes like in English. And if we say E, we pronounce it in a short way like in it, or in the long way like in easy. And then of course there's this special letter combination CH. If you remember from my other videos, there are different ways to pronounce these two letters together. How do you pronounce it in this case when there's an E in front of it? Do you remember the rule? It's pronounced after an E like in H. If you remember, I told you that CH can also be pronounced like hi, but without voice. And it's pronounced this way after the E, like in ich, Licht and nicht. So let's try to put this all together. If you remember, this was the German umlaut Ä. So we pronounce this whole word like hässlich. I say it again. Hässlich. So here is the next word. It means pretty. Do you remember the rules? This letter, for instance, is the German umlaut Ü. But what about the rest of the letters? Try to remember which letters are pronounced differently in German than in English. Here is the solution. The Ü, and then also this letter combination. Do you remember how this is pronounced? The SCH. Let me show you. It's down here. You learned from my other video that the SCH is pronounced like sh in shy. So let's try to put this all together. We would pronounce it like hübsch. I say it again, like hübsch. So here is the last word, which means beautiful. So try to remember which words are pronounced differently in German than in English. Here is the solution. This letter combination is pronounced like what I showed you before. Like sh down here. And then again, of course, the German umlaut Ö. We can't pronounce it differently because you don't have this sound. But anyway, I hope you remember how this is pronounced. Now let's try to put this all together. We would pronounce it like schön. I say it again, schön. So I hope that this was helpful for you, and if you like, you can check out more training videos. But for now, I wish you viel Glück, viel Spaß und tschüss.